I called off my engagement at our rehearsal dinner while the string lights were still warming up and the waiter was pouring the second round of champagne, and I did it without raising my voice because the words didn't need volume to be a siren. She wanted a break to explore her feelings for her ex. She had framed it as a mature pause, and she wanted me to treat it like weather, something that just happens and then passes if you keep a polite umbrella. I looked at the long farmhouse table, at the name cards we'd picked together, at her parents' hopeful faces, and I said we would not be continuing to the part where I pretended not to hear the thunder. A hush spread like a stain. My mother reached for my elbow. My father stared at his napkin as if there were instructions printed there for this exact emergency. My fiancée blinked with a practiced innocence that had gotten us through a lot of small storms, and then she said my name the way people say a rope when they're reaching for it. I said her name back, but I said it like I was setting something down that I'd been carrying too far. Across from me, her best friend lifted her chin, put her glass down gently, and said, "I'm proud of you for choosing self-respect over optics." The room snapped to look at her the way a flock snaps to a hawk. She did not flinch. She put a steady hand on my shoulder like a lighthouse hand on the dark. That was the moment the story changed shape. We did not break because of a single text or a single kiss. We broke in inches, over the kind of months that look normal from the sidewalk. I used to think love was most tested by big fires. I know now it can also be tested by humidity. We met at a volunteer build for a tiny homes project. She wore a bandana like an intention and I wore gloves that made my hands confident, and we laughed over crooked nails and straight edges like two people who had decided to be good at a future together. We built weekends around hardware stores and brunch lines. We collected potential, the way couples collect mugs they don't need but look good in their hands. She had an ex who was a story and not a person, or so she said, the kind of chapter you keep because the spine won't close clean without it, and I nodded like a reasonable man nods at someone else's past. Engagement came after 2 years that looked solid in photos. We said the right sentences at the right parties and our friends said the right blessings. Then the wedding planning started to nibble at us. Then her job started to ask too much of her spine. Then the ex started sending thoughts that were framed like apologies. He had moved back to town for closure. He had been to therapy and discovered he had feelings. He had learned the language that makes selfishness sound like a diploma. She told me she needed a break, with one of those careful smiles that sprout when people are doing something not quite honest but almost defensible. She said, "It's not you, it's unfinished business." She said she didn't want to leave me, she wanted to confirm coming back. I stood in my own kitchen holding my own coffee and felt like a guest who had stayed past his welcome. She asked me to be secure enough to allow it. The night she proposed the pause, her best friend sat on the other end of our couch with a textbook on attachment open and her eyes on both of us. She said, "Be clear about your boundaries," then she looked at me and said, "Clarity starts with telling the truth you don't want to hear." I didn't understand yet why her voice moved the furniture inside me. We set a rule that the break still meant fidelity, because we were engaged and the ring was a sentence we had promised to keep. She nodded. She said she would just talk to him, close the door correctly. I wanted so badly to be the right kind of man that I swallowed the impulse to say that some doors have a hinge that never forgets your hand. The first week of the break, we still texted in the mornings. The second week she was busy. The third week she was processing. I am not stupid. I am also not brave with my own heart. I told myself to wait for the weather to pass. I told myself to be modern and generous like the blogs advise. I told myself I could carry us through this if I did not make it about my pride. One night, while she was out walking, I knocked a glass off the coffee table and bent to pick it up and saw her phone wedged under the couch cushion where it had fallen, screen lit, message preview bright as a flare. I didn't go looking. The looking found me. The message said, "I keep thinking of you at the lake and how we never finished the conversation, can you send the picture?" And he sent the picture, and it was not obscene, it was worse, it was ordinary, a bench and a pair of knees and a half-drunk coffee, a photo that only matters because of who took it and who looked. My throat went dry in that specific way that means reality is walking into the room and you don't know which door it will use. I put the phone back where it had been. I sat on the floor and stared at the bookshelf like it had been rearranged by a stranger. She came home with cheeks that looked weathered and hugged me with arms that were present but not inside. She said she was tired. She said, "Thank you for being so understanding." She said, "I think it's almost closed." I said, "Okay." I said, "Take your time." I said it because I was afraid that if I said anything else, would say everything else. The next morning her best friend texted me and asked if I had time for coffee. We sat in a quiet place the city had built for people who work out of laptops and feelings. She said, "Tell me what you know." I said, "I know she is trying to write a decent ending to a book that does not deserve a decent ending." I said, "I found a picture, and I think I found us inside it, and we don't belong there." She did not rush to defend her friend. She did not rush to indict her. She said, "What do you need?" Nobody had asked me that in the whole script. I didn't have an answer yet, so I said the thing that came to the top of the well. I said, "I need to know if I should be here when she gets back." The friend looked at me in a way that did not pity. She said, "Be here for you. Be honest for both of you. Be kind to the part of you that is acting brave as a disguise." On week 4 of the break, my fiancée said she wanted to postpone the tasting because her mother was overwhelmed. On week 5 she said she was seeing a new therapist who suggested she revisit past attachments. On week 6 I saw the ex at the farmer's market touching a tomato like the world should applaud him for savoring. I walked past and he looked up with that modern new man smile, regret and growth, and he said my name, and I felt something under my ribs tighten, not anger exactly, but a promise I was not sure I could keep. I said, "We are engaged." He said, "She told me." He said it with the confidence of a man who thinks told is the same as excused. I said, "Then stop making room for yourself in our minutes." He said, "I'm just a conversation." I had never wanted to punch a concept until that day. I didn't punch him. I went home and sat on our kitchen floor again, because that's what you do when your heart wants to say something your mouth won't let it and your mind is trying to babysit both. I wrote an email to myself that said, "You can be loyal and still leave." I didn't send it. I saved it in drafts like a lifeboat. The rehearsal dinner arrived like a test you can't study for. I told myself we would be past the worst by then because people don't make families out of indecision, and then the waiter poured champagne and she stood to make a toast and she said, "Thank you all for your patience with us, we've been navigating something," and I felt the floor decide not to help me. She was about to sell the room a version of our love that did not include an expiration date stamped by someone else's nostalgia. I did not let her. I said, "We are not navigating this anymore," and the room leaned toward the outcome like a witness. Then she said, "Can we talk in private?" And I said, "We have done nothing but talk in private," and her friend put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Say the truth without cruelty." I said, "I'm not marrying a pause." I said, "I'm not marrying a hypothesis." I said, "I love you enough to stop pretending I'm not bleeding." Her mother put a hand to her chest. Her father stood with the straight back of a man who is about to lift something heavy and useless. The ex was not there, of course. He never was during the parts where you have to wash dishes. We left separately. She took a bag and fled to the condo her parents kept for art shows and arguments. I drove to the small apartment I'd kept all along because I am the kind of man who keeps a quiet place to go when the room gets too scripted. Her best friend texted me and asked if I was safe. I said, yes. She asked if I had eaten. I said, no. She dropped soup at my door like we were in a year without touch. I didn't open the door until she had gone because I didn't trust my face. The next morning my fiancée came over and put her ring on the table and said she needed the weekend to pack, and then she said, "Unless," and she left the "unless" on the floor between us like a loose board. I said, "No unless." She cried the kind of tears that know they are being watched. I cried the kind that don't know where to go. After she left, I gathered the evidence of us into a box and put it by the door like proof that love is also objects. I took a walk without a destination. I ended up at the cafe where her best friend liked to sit with her textbook and her 3 pens and her quiet. She saw me and put her highlighter down and did not ask me to explain. She asked me to breathe. We learned each other through the kind of small talk that knows it is something else. She was smarter than my pride and kinder than my fear. She did not flirt with me. She did not fix me. She held a space where I could say the unhandsome things. I told her about the email I had written to myself. I told her about the picture of the lake bench. I told her about the way I had mistaken endurance for love. She told me about the way love shows up even when you tell it not to, the way it can be loyal to the wrong address until you change the mailbox. We started like people start who are trying not to start. She kept a careful distance that taught me what respect looks like in motion. She said, "Finish this ending correctly, then see what wants to begin." I said, "How do you know what correctly is?" She said, "If at the end of it you respect yourself more than you did yesterday, you did it correctly." Weeks passed and my ex-fiancée kept orbiting me with messages that looked like invitations and read like replacements for apologies. She wanted me to understand things she did not have the courage to say outright. I wanted to be the man who could grant that understanding without drowning. Her best friend did not poison the well. When my ex asked why I wouldn't try again, her friend said, "Because he tried while you were elsewhere, and because the trying is not a rope you hand someone while you climb into someone else's car." The first time I laughed again, it startled me into dropping my keys. The first time I slept through the night without dreaming of a paused clock, I woke up and made pancakes because that is what my father did on mornings that mattered. I shared them with the woman who had become the voice in my head that knew the exit routes. We did not call it a date. We called it breakfast at noon because we were tired of pretending small acts don't save people. Then came the message that almost took us backwards. My ex sent a photo of a ring she was trying on. Not ours. Not the one she had returned. She said she was seeing what fit. The caption had the same sunlight tone that had once convinced me to paint a wall yellow. I did not respond. I forwarded it to no one. I went for a run and let the sidewalk do the thinking. When I came back, there was another message. She said, "I'm sorry." She said, "I miss you." She said, "The break made me realize I want you." She said, "I am ready now." I held the phone like a live wire. I wrote back the sentence I had earned. I said, "I'm ready for a life where I don't have to wait to be chosen." I set the phone face down and made tea and listened to the water agree with me. That night I met her best friend by the river where the late trains are loud enough to let you say things without worrying about the echo. I told her I wanted to try with her. I told her I wanted to try like adults try, without pretending the past is a stranger. She looked at me for a long time. She said, "I won't be your antidote." I said, "I don't want one." She said, "Then tell me you can bless what happened without being owned by it." I said, "I bless the part where she taught me that loyalty without reciprocity is self-abandonment." I said, "I bless the part where I learned to hear my own no." I said, "I bless the part where you showed me there are voices that don't lie to me when I'm tired." She smiled in a way that was not a promise and not a warning. She said, "I'm not asking for a vow. I'm asking for a season of honesty." We began. Not with fireworks. With grocery lists. With walks that did not perform. With the kind of kisses that happen after you've put the dishes away. My ex tried one last time, a letter written in a register she knew used to move me, the mix of shared memory and future tense possibility. I read it once. I thanked her for writing. I said no to the life where I measure my worth against someone else's maybe. I put the letter in the same box as the name cards and the ribbon and the sketch of what the cake could have looked like, and I carried the box to the donation center because sometimes the thing you need to give away is the version of yourself that waited politely while the house burned. The first time I said I love you to the woman who had started as the voice that held the lamp for me, I said it without pushing it across the table like a contract. I said it on a Tuesday when the rain made the city sound braver than it was and she was reading on my couch with her feet tucked under her like a comma. She looked up and did not make it dramatic. She said, I know, and I said, I needed to hear myself say it, and she said, me too, and then she said it back, and the room did that quiet the heart understands. Months later we walked past the lake bench from the old photo and I did not feel the old elevator drop in my stomach. I felt something else, something like gratitude with the teeth filed down. I do not hate my ex. Hate is expensive and I am saving for better things. I am grateful to her for the part of the road that proved I could carry my own weight. I am grateful to myself for setting the ring on the table before it became a lifebuoy. I am grateful to the friend who did not rescue me but handed me the map I had been pretending not to see. On what would have been our anniversary I made a small dinner and lit a candle and said a short grace over the lesson. I texted my ex a single message, not to reopen, not to provoke, but to close the door from my side with respect. I wrote, thank you for the years and the truth that came late, I wish you peace, I don't wish you back. She did not reply and I did not wait. I turned to the woman I love now and said the line that still surprises me when it leaves my mouth. I said, thank you for standing up for me at a table that wasn't built for it. I said, thank you for telling the truth even when it was titled against your friend. I said, thank you for not being the plot twist but the plot. She squeezed my hand and said, no more rehearsal dinners, just dinners. I laughed like a man who can finally hear himself. If there's a moral I am allowed to keep, it is this. When someone asks for a break, they are telling you the story they plan to be in. You are allowed to be in a different story. The unpredictable ending is not that I moved on. It's that I learned to be still long enough for love to find a chair beside me without having to fight for the microphone. I ended my engagement in a room full of witnesses and walked out with the one person who did not clap for the wrong scene. I do not regret the break. It gave me the bridge. I crossed. I stayed crossed. And in the morning I made pancakes again, and the kitchen did not feel like a museum, and the quiet did not feel like a verdict, and the life we are building does not need a pause to feel real.